Diviney, I think is how you say your name. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know what, man? I am super excited that you are here, and I think I see a whoop on your hand. Do I see a whoop?
Yes.
We're fellow whoopers.
Fellow whoopers, yeah.
So the difference between me and you is that you actually use the whoop to do things like, I don't know, be a Navy SEAL, and I'm a podcaster that wakes up in the morning and sees how many hours of deep sleep I got last night.
I wasn't using the whoop when I was a Navy SEAL. So
you weren't?
No, and it's been 4 years actually since I was a Navy SEAL. So I'm now trying to better take care of myself holistically because you take it for granted when you're in that profession. So yeah, I'm just paying better attention.
Yeah, I bet. All right, so we're going to get into all of that. I think a good place for us to start off would be for you growing up in Connecticut in the 70s. Your dad was a pilot, mm-hmm. and you and your twin brother both wanted to be military jet pilots. What was it that you saw in your dad that inspired you to want to consider the same path?
Yeah, it's interesting because my dad was a lawyer. He still is. He was a private pilot. It was something he did for fun. But one of the true gifts that both of my parents gave all of us kids was how do I put it? Almost a no pressure environment to do what he wanted to kind of explore what we wanted. There was never any kind of pushing us to go any direction. It was like, hey, just figure out what you want to do and try it. And my dad loved flying, and he saw that my brother and I loved it. And so when we told him, well, we want to be military pilots, he was of course thrilled. And it's interesting. My twin brother he flew the Harrier for 20 years, which is the jump jet, the jet that goes takes off vertically up and down. That's the Aviate-B Harrier. He flew that, and then and now is flying, for FedEx. And my dad just loves hearing those flying stories. He's enamored by that profession. So it was kind of cool. So yeah, both my parents, for all of us kids, just had this mentality that, hey, just keep an open mind, figure out what you want to do, and go for it. And they never ever pressured us in any direction, which was really unique and something I try to do for my kids.
So did you refer to that as junk, Junk, or jump as in jumping?
Jump. It's nicknamed the jump as in jumping
because it jumps.
Because it takes off vertically. Yeah, it has nozzles. So have you seen the movie True Lies?
I did.
Yeah. So that at the end of that movie, when the planes land vertically, the jets those are Harriers. Yeah. So they're awesome.
Can I tell you, I thought that was some BS on the internet. I never knew, because you see these planes and they're doing all kinds of crazy things, and you never know what's real and what's not real. Yeah. I did not know that these were actually planes that did that. Well, that's some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So look, we all have these moments in our life that define our destiny, and one of your moments was when you read an article about the Navy SEALs, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about what was going through your head when you read that article about, I would read the article and stop midway through and say, this is fucking crazy. I have no desire to do any of that. But you not only did it, you made sort of a life out of it. So why?
Yeah. Well, it was an article about all the special operations forces in the first Gulf War, so the 90s, and it outlined all of them. And I could remember it was cool to kind of think about these units that were kind of James Bondish, I guess. But the thing about the SEALs was they had pictures of guys in every different environment, like desert, jungle, winter warfare, jumping out of planes, underwater. And out of all the pictures, there were 20 plus pictures, 18 or so were all SEALs, just in different environments. And I was already kind of biased towards the Navy anyway, because I wanted to be a Navy pilot. I was like, man, these Navy SEALs do everything. And in addition to that, I loved water. I love the water. I love being on the water, in the water, underwater. I just love it. And I loved it as a kid. And the fact that was where they came from. The SEALs come from the water. And there's a saying in the teams, it's like, if you are ever if you're ever in trouble, head for the water, because the enemy will never be stupid enough or brave enough to follow you there, right? Because the water is hostile. You can't breathe. It's cold. There's pressure. So the fact that they made this hostile environment their refuge was just really audacious and cool for me. And ultimately, as I went through my processes, I went to Purdue and was ROTC. And at the beginning, in the few years, freshman, sophomore year, I was kind of debating, okay, pilot or SEAL. But ultimately, I kind of said to myself, I knew I could be a pilot, but I wanted to see if I could be a SEAL. And I really wanted to test myself. And so that's why I chose that. And fortunately, it worked out. I got selected. And then fortunately, I made it through training.
And that was how long ago?
That was back in 96 that I went through SEAL training. Yeah.
Okay. Were you raised in Connecticut, but were you raised around water? Like, for example, I live in Hermosa Beach, and I'm learning to surf and stuff like that. I just took it up now, but did you spend a lot of time in the water for you? Was that your main driver?
Well, yeah, we went to the beach. We lived right on the coast. We went to the beach every day of the summer. Now, I didn't scuba dive until I was in college, and that was really awesome. As soon as I got underwater, I was like, man, this is even better. So yeah, I had built up this love and tolerance for the water, which is interesting because when you look at people who gravitate towards that profession, certainly there are anomalies, but a lot of them have had some exposure to the water, and you kind of have to. Although, yes, there are anomalies of guys who have no exposure and they show up and like, okay, and then they just jump into it. But that same could be said for skydiving, right? I mean, I had never skydived before or shot a gun before. I joined the SEAL team, so those were all very new experiences for me.
All right, let's talk about the training. This is the thing that everybody wants to know about. There's so much information out there. You can buy, I don't know, fitness programs that model Navy SEAL training. And, when people are talking about the best of the best of the best, it's always around the Navy SEALs, et cetera. So you have described that training as pure. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by pure? Why does that word come to mind for you?
Well, it's because when you get to SEAL training, there's a lot first of all, there's a lot that it takes to get to SEAL training. And so you have to, there's a lot of hard work and things you have to do just to get there in the first place. But once you get there, it's almost like everything you've done before is erased. It doesn't matter, right? So you could be the valedictorian of your class. You could be the Division I athlete or the Olympian. You could be the kid from the farm. It doesn't matter what color. What color or race or creed you are. All the training is so incredibly difficult. It's all about taking every candidate down to basically below zero and saying, okay, what do you got? What can you do what we're asking you to do? And there's a purity in that system because now the kid from the farm who's never done a sport in his life is now equal to the Division I athlete. They're the same because they're basically below zero. And so it's taking you down to your very elemental you, because the guys who show up who are great runners, well, they're going to run you so hard you can't run anymore. Or they're going to get you in the cold water, which has nothing to do with running, or they're going to make you swim. The guys who are great swimmers, well, they might not be great runners, or they're going to make you run in the sand, or they're making a PT with a log. There's everything about the training is designed to take away all of your advantages, right? Yeah. And even you out. And I think so it was, I remember getting there, and I remember, even though it was tough, I remember there being a sense of relief. And even guys who are going to, who are getting ready to start SEAL training or starting SEAL training. And if they reach out to me, I say, listen, here's the good news. It's like, nothing else matters. Everything that you've done, all the work you've done to get there, everything's erased now. It's all on you. It's not about recommendations. It's not about grades. It's not about the PT test you took and the scores everything is about you and whether or not you have it in you. And there's a beauty, I think, and a purity to that I really enjoyed throughout my whole career, because, whatever training we were doing, it was kind of like that. And the profession is largely like that.
So when you describe it, I have this vision I'm making in my head of, somebody in a pool somewhere that is, as an example, treading water, and, they're treading water past their ability to continue to tread water. And, they're starting to go under now. And I'm assuming that what you mean by that is the below zero is when they hit that wall where they're like, not another minute, not another second, I cannot do this.
Yeah.
And then somehow, some way, they tap into something. And then they kick into a gear that was unavailable to them prior to that. Talk to me about how one does that. Where does it come from? Is it just your drive where you just kick in? Like, because I could go into the water and I can say, using my example, I can say, I'm gonna stay here forever and I'm gonna do this. But there's going to be a point where even the best of intentions that I had getting in there, it's just not gonna, it's gotta come from somewhere else. Where is that other place? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, what a beautiful question, and a complex one, because I think it's different for every person. Where do you dig from? When it's time to dig and it feels like you have nothing left. And the answer for a guy going through SEAL training might be different than the answer from someone going through chemotherapy or from someone going through a really rough, loss or divorce or whatever. You name the life event. But this is what fascinates me about attributes, because, I wanted to really try to figure out what it was that people, at least in my environment, had and take that down to the atomic level so that it then could be related to everybody else. Because when you start talking about the attributes of grit, which are courage, adaptability, perseverance, and resilience, those are the same attributes that the person fighting cancer uses, or the person grinding it out through a tough program or situation in life. Same stuff, right? So I think those elemental things are what we dig into. And then I think that it has to do with purpose, right? There's going to be a why as to why do I need to prevail. Now, the easy answer is survival. Okay, if you're treading water and you feel like you're at zero and you feel like you got nothing left, and you recognize that you're going to be in the water for a longer time, you're going to dig down. Survival becomes the reason why you keep going. But if you take that up a little bit of a notch, the why could be, well, I want to be a Navy SEAL. I mean, there's nothing that's going to stop me here. And that might be the clarity. The why might be the person who's fighting cancer. I will, that's survival, but, I want to make something better. I want to do something more. And so I think purpose has to do, if you threw the example, Rob, would, if you and I went to the pool and I said, okay, Rob, tread water, and I'm gonna make you tread water until you have nothing left, and that might be hours or days, right? And then once you're like, I just got nothing left, I said, no, keep going, right? Well, at that point, you're going to be asking yourself, why am I doing this? And
Right.
And if the answer isn't sufficient, you're going to stop doing it. And I think for guys who don't make it through that training, they sometimes that answer is not sufficient. And some guys quit training and very honestly afterwards say, yeah, listen, I went through it and I decided this is not for me. And they're very comfortable with that decision. Now, not everybody's comfortable with the decision, but there's a lot of guys who quit and they're very comfortable with the decision because like, hey, I went there, I tried it. This is not for me. I am now firm in that decision. And that's perfectly okay. Because that's what the program's trying to accomplish.
It's interesting because, I was joking when we first started and, I'm so clear about my why not wanting to do this that I didn't even have to waste anybody's time.
Right.
But when somebody is looking at the vision of being able to say, I'm a Navy SEAL, without a strong enough why, you will go underwater and you're not going to tread because that why isn't there. I love that. And I'm assuming that is one of the reasons why you have a partnership with Simon Sinek, who wrote a little book called Why, right?
Yeah.
So I see the marriage. Your book Attributes and Why work perfectly together with, his philosophy.
Well, it's also because it explains human behavior, right? It's all about, really what causes us to do what we do, and purpose is part of that, and attributes are part of that. And I think this idea that and in the SEAL case, just to add one more thing to this, so many people go to SEAL training, and when I went through SEAL training, very few people knew what Navy SEAls were. It was very bizarre for us to go from not being known to suddenly the most famous military unit on the planet, right? But people, a lot of guys, especially today, come in with this preconceived notion of what being a Navy SEAL is going to be like, and it usually surrounded by a bunch of cool things and a bunch of cool music, right? Yeah. And I used to tell guys, hey, you got to realize when you're doing the job, there's no cool music playing in the background. It's often going to suck, right? It's going to be cold, it's going to be wet, it's going to be dirty, it's going to be miserable a lot of times. Well, Buds basically tells you that right off the bat. I mean, SEAL training, you're thrown into misery right off the bat. And I think that's the first hit people say is like, oh, wait a second, this is not what I thought it would be. Because oftentimes people go in with a preconceived notion.
Buds is the initial screening out process. Is that right?
That's correct. Basic underwater demolition / SEAL training, where sailors go through the 6-month course, and after which graduate and say, okay, now you are a Navy SEAL. And that's the attrition rate's about 89%, something like that, between 85 and 89%. So
it's almost everybody doesn't make it.
Yeah. The odds aren't good.
The odds are not good. Okay, so when Osama bin Laden got captured and killed, was that a SEAL team that did that?
It was, and we can't go into detail. I mean, it's out there. I can't talk about in detail about what which teams did what. But yeah, those were Navy SEALs. Yes. Okay.
So when you think about that sort of thing, and we can keep that generic so you don't get in any trouble. Last thing I need is a Navy SEAL knocking my door down for getting out of you what I shouldn't get out of you. Would you have wanted to be on a mission like that? Would that have excited you, in quotes, to be able to do something like that? In other words, do you look at something like that and say, this kind of thing is the pinnacle? This is what I'm here for. I'm serving my country. I'm doing something that is amazing, in terms of all of the damage that we've suffered at his hands, et cetera. Is that the pinnacle for you, or would it have been?
It's what a great question. So this is the difference, I believe. I mean, the easy answer is yes, but it's not as simple as that, because the difference between the true warriors and the people who aren't, right, are the people who look at the profession as a profession and consider themselves surgeons, right? That was a mission, that was a job to do, one of many, and knowing details about that mission, which kind of the world does too, but being able to understand details about that mission and compare it to hundreds of different missions we all did. That was on the difficulty scale out of 1 to 10, being 10 being most difficult. That was about a 3 or 4.
Why so low?
Because it was pretty straightforward. It was like, you're flying there, you're going in, you're getting the guy, and you're coming back out. Right now, there's certainly political ramifications, but that's from the. I mean, there have been, and I've been on some very gnarly, difficult ops that were like level 8. Right. So, but again, I think the truest warriors, and I would count among those ranks many of the Navy SEALs I worked with and know, are the ones who look at every mission as the job to do in the moment. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to do the best I can here, because again, it doesn't matter if you're on a high stakes mission or a high vis mission, at least later, like that one, or just one that you're doing another night in Iraq, right? There's still the risk of death. There's still the risk of not coming back. And so you have to approach everything with a surgical, professional viewpoint, and understand that, hey, I'm here to do the very best I can on this mission in this moment, whatever it might be, whoever we might be after, because that's the job in the moment. And I think that's, again, we would say, hey, would a surgeon feel differently when they're operating on someone like, I don't know, Tom Hanks versus the plumber who just came in and needs the same surgery? And the top surgeons were like, no, there's no difference. It's a human being, and I have to do my job the same way I do for this person as I do for this person. Same thing with the military profession for those who do it correctly. You, in your life right now, you're
your baseline for pushing the edge or creating, the kind of life that you had when you were active in SEALs. You were focused and driven and wanting to be the best. As you're aging and your priorities are changing for you, do you look at that time in your life now as that was then, it was amazing, but I'm in a different headspace now in my life. I'm shifting more into business. I'm shifting into consulting, and I've translated some of the principles. It's part of who I am, but that piece of me, I left at that time in my career. Talk to me about that a little bit for you.
Yeah, 100%. And it's not, but it's more, I think it's more because I'm of the belief that we have to continually seek out our new edges and push ourselves. And that often means shifting contexts altogether, and in this case, maybe jumping off one peak into the valley so that you can start climbing the next. Now, there's certainly an aging out process that goes on in the SEAL teams, right? But it's also why I don't call myself a Navy SEAL. And oftentimes when people introduce me as a Navy SEAL, I try to correct them. It's like, no, I'm a former Navy SEAL. I don't do the job anymore. The guys out there right now, they're the ones doing the job, and they deserve the credit of being a Navy SEAL. Now, certainly I take great pride in having done it, and it's in a position of honor on my mantle. But it's on my mantle nonetheless. It's something that I want to be able to look and draw my lessons from, and then explore a new frontier, because I think we only begin dying when we stop growing, and human growth is dependent on us continuing to find and explore our potential by stepping out to those edges, those new horizons that we may have not had a chance to explore before.
Do you find yourself intentionally looking for things that are difficult and things that are challenging in your life? In other words, if it's easy for you, it's just not as exciting, and you're looking for the challenge. Has that become part of who you are moving forward?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I necessarily look for stuff, but what I do is I'll set audacious goals with the understanding that things are going to be challenging, and I certainly take pride in tackling those things. Now, I mean, I don't know if I don't like heights, and I talk about them in the book. So that means, and I've never bungee jumped. Okay. I have no interest in going and bungee jumping. That would be an edge I have no interest in exploring. So I would say I look for those things that are congruent with my goals, and do not shy away. In fact, expect that there'll be difficulty in achieving those, and I like that fact, But no, I'm not if something happens to be easy once in a while, I'm usually grateful for that.
Yeah.
But,
okay. Good.
Yeah. But I know that in any long-term goal, ease. If it's too easy for too long, something's wrong, and you're not challenging yourself. But that's not going to happen if you set audacious goals. It's just not. Life doesn't work that way. So.
Yeah, I love that. You've done 14 overseas deployments to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and we talked about the mission with Osama bin Laden. Let's say on a level of difficulty, a 3, and I know what you mean by that, because it was super clear. For you, when you think about those level 8s or 9s personally, when you were involved in those, is there anything that you're able to share, or if not, can you be general enough to tell me what sort of stood out for you and maybe what you learned from it?
That made it difficult? Is that
Yeah. So in other words, if you're looking back mentally in your career and you're saying, scale of 1 to 10, what was an 8, 9, or 10 for me? That it was difficult. It was scary. I didn't know how we were going to pull it off. And here's what I learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's a couple of factors in that. I mean, loss of life on any count makes a mission very difficult. That's no one, everybody, that's an easy answer, right? One of the biggest things is environment, right? And terrain. Afghanistan missions were always harder than Iraq missions because the terrain in Afghanistan is just, I mean, awful. I mean, some of the most beautiful countryside you've seen you could ever see on the planet, right? But you're talking about 10,000 foot peaks and altitudes and just environmental conditions that make those types of missions much tougher. I think anytime things didn't go now nothing ever goes 100% according to plan, but anytime things just went haywire in terms of the plan, that makes it difficult. And I think you come away. So the interesting thing about that, the SEAL culture and any high performing culture is the ability to kind of constantly after action ourselves and assess. And so we'd have, you'd have these missions, and anything you did afterwards, you'd immediately do what's called a critical event debrief, right? And you'd ask 3 questions: what went right, what went wrong, and if we could do something differently, what would it be? And that was automatic. And those 3 questions, that environment allows all of the shit to get laid on the table right away, sort it out, and say, okay, next time we're gonna. And so the lessons learned process was almost unconscious in some ways because it was so ingrained. But yeah, I think you always hoped for missions to go as planned. You always hoped, I think missions, that might be one case where you always kind of hoped missions would go easier, vice harder, because hard meant bad. Hard usually meant bad things were happening. But you always recognized that based on what you learned, you'd get together the best plan that you could. You'd pre-think through as many contingencies that you could without getting overboard, which means, let's think through 3, 4, 5 different things, different ways this could go. But then you have the supreme confidence in yourself and your team that if anything goes outside that, you'll handle it on the fly. And that's really what the whole system feels like most of the time.
On the flip side, I'm sure not everything was difficult, and I'm sure that even in Afghanistan and even in Iraq, you had a good time. Was there anything that stands out for you as great times? We always hear about the crazy missions and the difficult times and the loss of life, but you're a human being, who's been there, 14 times with guys that are, all on board to do the same thing. Were there good times?
Oh yeah. And so I always say that people ask me if I miss the teams, and I say, no, I don't miss the teams, because to miss, just that word implies a longing that you can go back. And I'm perfectly comfortable with where I am. I look back fondly on the teams, and the parts I look back fondly the most on are just the camaraderie and the laughing, like the jokes. I talk about humor in the book, and any high performing team has class clowns, right? The teams are like all class clowns. And you learn this at Buds. You learn how to laugh when things are miserable, but the times that I can think of when we were laughing so hard, we were in tears and the environment around us was miserable, right? Or just, you're sitting around the bonfire after an op, and you're just visiting as a group, right? You're just connecting. Those were always really, really special times, the great times, and so yeah, I think, but even I can remember even when times were like really kind of iffy. I remember being on missions, and I'd be looking around and be like, man, we are really in kind of a beehive right now. Of just there's potential for things to go really, really badly, in terms of where we are right now. But then I'd look around, like the guys around me, and I'd feel such supreme confidence and comfort, not arrogance, confidence and comfort, that I was just surrounded by some of the best people on the planet. And we were just this kind of synergistic flock of birds that we all just read off of each other in such great ways that it was a very cool feeling. So yeah, a lot of good times. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I always say I'm extremely grateful that it's over, but I'm extremely, extremely grateful that I was a part of it. So
I bet. In the pandemic that we're in right now, people are going through tough times, right? They're trying to figure out what the hell's going on in the world? When are we going to stop wearing masks? When are we going to be able to start, traveling to other countries and blah, blah, blah. And I can even feel myself where so much of this is going on the subconscious level that when it first started to happen, I was like waking up at night, like almost in like a little bit of a panic, like feeling closed in, right? And when I think about someone who has seen what you've seen and has been a part of the kinds of things that you've been in, you can block things out consciously. You can will your mind away from something if you want, but it's really tough to get out of the subconscious. Like that stuff is in there, and it's just gonna work its way out the way it works its way out. How did you, if you had this issue at all, how did you reconcile all of the things that you saw and did and not have it really affect your mental health, which it has with a lot of guys in the service?
It has. It takes a very deliberate process because yes, we are SEALs, especially are master compartmentalizers, and it's very, very valuable when you need to get through the shit, but can be very dangerous and destructive if you don't unlock that door and let some of that stuff out. So there were times where I would experience something and, in the moment, there's no time to mourn, none, because you have to complete the mission, right? So I always say that when you see movies of someone losing their buddy in the middle of a gunfight, and then the next 5 minutes is spent while this person's wailing over this, it just doesn't happen, right? The immediacy is you win the fight, right? And so those times where there was no time to mourn, oftentimes I would, once everything was done and you're back in your base and in your safe zone, whatever it is, and all the work's done and I'm by myself, I would deliberately mourn. I would take the time to deliberately mourn. And I know other guys who I talked to who would do the same. Some guys didn't do that, and some guys really they hurt. I think one of the sense of loss is one of the biggest kind of traumatizing things that can go on in that profession. But one of the reasons why I think a lot of military folks have trouble, especially after they leave the service, is because it's not as much there's trauma of things they did or things that they saw. It's because there's a sense of loss of the team, right? They were suddenly had this identity and being surrounded by all these people and this support network. And suddenly when you leave, you're on your own. I mean, it is really stark, and that's, people ask me sometimes what kind of courage does it take, to transition, write a book, or do whatever whatever the next step is, to come out of the military and move. And one of the things I recognize is that when you're on such a close knit team, one of the things you realize you fear is being by yourself. Right now, I have to do it on my own. There's no support network. In the military, you don't have to worry about a lot of things. You have medical, you have uniforms, you have a paycheck, all that stuff. Suddenly you're on your own, and for a lot of people that can be very overwhelming. So there's a lot of transition services for the military folks, tons of resources out there now, which is awesome because there used to not be, that help people make that transition and make people feel supported because they're used to being supported. So a deliberacy in understanding that when you lock up emotions, even if it's for purpose, because you must at some point let those out and process them. And if you can't do it on your own, I definitely recommend someone go get help doing it, in the term of psychologist or whatever, someone, or even best friends or whatever, someone who can help you unlock those, because that'll really make strides with your mental health. Yeah.
How about spiritually? In other words, most of the things that you do as a SEAL is logical, it's strategic, it's planned. But when you step into the world of the spiritual world, there are things that are just unfolding the way that they're unfolding. Have you, as a result of being in the SEALs, has it changed how you view the spiritual side of yourself?
Yeah, the spiritual side is tough because that's, again, very subjective. Some people consider spiritual religious. Other people consider spiritual something other than the physical in some way, shape, or form, whatever that means. I would say that that in my case, I'm not necessarily a religious person. I grew up Catholic, and I did the whole, Catholic school and all that stuff. And as I grew up, I kind of moved a little bit more away from that. And I think going to war and being in that environment probably caused me to ask even more questions about the whole religious aspect of spirituality. And again, I have no judgment. It's me just asking questions. And so for me, spirituality has more been internally focused and introspective in terms of, okay, what am I learning about myself? And in that learning process, how does that then allow me to operate and succeed and perform in these environments that sometimes are happening without my control, right? So I think it's a great question. From a spiritual aspect, I think I've probably remained fairly even in terms of that. It hasn't taught me. In other words, I never experienced any epiphanies, that maybe some other guys had. So I've remained fairly even and really sought out to, and again, maybe it's because of my logical kind of, I tend to veer towards the logical, to try to put explanations about that which I can't explain. Which is, again, why I'm so interested in human behavior. Like why do I behave the way I do, and therefore why do other people behave the way they do? So right. Kind of a rounded answer there, but that's probably the best I can do with that one.
No, it's good because you're really the spiritual side of what you're doing in some strange way with the book that you wrote, The Attributes of the 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. It could almost be argued that sort of like spiritually came through you because you're taking all of the strategy and logic that you've learned and you're explaining it. Mm-hmm. So there's also something that I'm unclear on, and that was the Spec Ops training program called Mind Gym. What was that? What was that?
Yeah. Mind Gym was just another facet of what I was responsible for when I was in this training officer position, where we were really, it was 2010-ish, right? So we were kind of in the meat of the war. We'd been at it for almost 10 years. So we had a bunch of folks who had gone to combat, been through it, and some guys who are starting to retire and leave. And we were asking the question, hey, can we do better in terms of our mental resilience and taking and mental health, really, but really also can we develop working relationships with our brain so that we perform better mentally as well? Because ultimately, physically we were pretty good. I mean, guys were in shape, they were doing the job. I mean, so in the gym, everybody was fine. But we all kind of figured that the next frontier of performance was going to be a mental one. So could we start to explore aspects of what was out there, in the science and the new, as new as we could get in terms of understanding our own brains a little bit better, understanding our relationships to our nervous system and our physiology, just through accessing thoughts and emotions, and playing around in that space. And that's really what it was initially, because we were just throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall and seeing what happened. So, we got these isolation pods, which are float tanks, and found, hey, guys were doing that and sleeping better. Some guys were able to visualize in there, and they found that helped their performance. We were doing mental acuity drills. We were doing HRV breathing and breathing techniques that allowed us to kind of shift our physiology from sympathetic to parasympathetic and get into a little bit more physiological micro recovery and perform a little bit better. But the problem with any type of endeavor like that is mental performance is very, very difficult to quantify and codify, like with data. Really easy in the physical world, because you can see if someone's broken physically, you can see how well they're walking or running or throwing a ball, and then you rehab them and and then you can see how much they've improved, right? That's a very easy thing to quantify. A lot more difficult when it comes to mental health and mental performance to both get a baseline and and then see how one's improved. So that's a project that's still ongoing. I'm not sure where they are in the at least in the teams, but it certainly is a flavor for society. There's a lot of stuff around mental health nowadays for everybody, which is cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And there's a lot of things like we talked about at the beginning with things like wearables with the Whoop. There's a company called Levels that does continuous glucose monitoring. So now we've got data that, you and I wake up in the morning, we open our Whoop app and it tells us you're recovered, you're not recovered, you're in the yellow, the red, the green, how much sleep you got last night, how much of it was in deep sleep, et cetera. So we can quantify all of those things. You're right, but the mental, I don't have a Whoop yet that tells me how my mind is doing. So we got to figure that out. So why did you write the book Attributes?
Because I am vastly interested in what I would call the elemental human. In other words, we always hear the saying, it's when we're in the times of deep challenge and stress where the real us shows up. And perhaps it's probably because of the experiences I went through with SEAL training and combat, all that stuff. I was thrown into, and it's just an environment where the real us was all the time. I mean, everything we did was about the real us. And so I wanted to dive into what are those innate qualities that in essence describe us. We are, as humans, all the same, okay? But we're like cars, okay? Some of us are Jeeps, some of us are Ferraris, and some of us are SUVs. And there's no judgment because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it would behoove us, if we want to understand our own performance and our own behavior, to lift the hood on ourselves and figure out what engine we are. Because we may be a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track or a Ferrari trying to run on a Jeep track. And again, there's nothing wrong with that either. That might be your choice, but it would better explain the challenges you might be having doing that. Or you might say, hey, I'm a Jeep. I should be running on a Jeep track. I'd be much happier that way. And I think these attributes are one of the first ways someone can begin to decode their own performance, their behavior, and understand why and how they show up to situations better, which will then allow them to understand their gaps or the deficiencies, and then choose if they do or do not want to work on that, because it's your choice. You don't have to be more adaptable, but if you want to work on your adaptability, that's cool. But then also, if you're interested in increasing and doing better performance wise, now a little bit more about what are some of those tools and hacks that can work on you, on your specific system, because there's there's thousands of cool techniques on how to increase performance here, how to peak here, how to do that. But there's almost too many, and one that works on one person isn't going to necessarily work on another person. Well, it'd be like, I'm going to put a nitrous oxide thing on my Jeep engine, right? It's just not going to work. It might blow the engine. So understanding your engine, understanding your set of attributes will help you do that. And so the book was written, and it was written very specifically so that when you read it, it's about the reader. It's not about Navy SEALs. It's not about super athletes. It's not about any of that stuff. Certainly, there's some stories to kind of help pinpoint some ideas, but when you read the book is about you, and you'll find when you read it that you're thinking about yourself and thinking about, okay, how do I, based on this, how does that show up for me? And that's really what I wanted to do. And the feedback I'm getting is that most people who read it are feeling that, which is cool.
Yeah, what's interesting is I love the individual approach that you have. Like, for example, I mentioned the glucose monitoring thing a moment ago. There are certain people that will wear this glucose monitor thing, and they will have, a salad with nuts, and it will spike their glucose like crazy. Mm-hmm. Other people have the exact same salad with nuts. The glucose has no effect. We're not robots. We're all different. We react differently, and we're trying to duplicate hacks and strategies that may not be duplicatable if you're a Jeep and the other one's a Ferrari. You have different, you're wired differently. That's what I love about your book. Okay, so we're going to link all of this up in the show notes, and as we wrap up here, I'm going to ask you some questions that are going to fall into the weird question category. Why is he asking me these questions? Just roll with it. What do people often get wrong about you?
Well, if they if they come in to meeting me knowing I'm a Navy SEAL, they usually come in with some probably preconceived notions that I'm kind of rough and mean and grumpy. Which I can be grumpy sometimes, but I'm actually not. I try to be empathetic. I try to be a nice person. So I'm actually more of a softie than people think.
Well, you got that badass Navy SEAL identity that travels with you. I mean, I would lead at a party with that when you want to, but also when you don't want to, I wouldn't either, because it's a double-edged sword, I'm sure.
It can be.
What new behavior or habits has most improved your life?
It was back in the high school days when I recognized and learned the power of the proper questions. Our brains are wired to answer questions. Okay, that's how our brains figure out the world. Because as humans, we want to be certain of things, so we ask questions about it, oftentimes unconsciously. If we, however, lodge a question into our conscious mind, our brain immediately begins to come up with answers. And I do this experiment with people all the time. I say, okay, answer this question. How would you double your income in the next 6 months? Okay, you have 30 seconds, write down everything that pops into your head. Doesn't matter how crazy, just do it. Give them 30 seconds. Okay, usually they come up with 5 or 6 things. Okay, some are ridiculous, but the point is not the answers. The point is that as soon as you lodge that question, your brain began to answer it. The problem is most of us do this the wrong way. We ask ourselves things like, why am I so bad at this? Why does this happen to me? Why are these people out to get me? As soon as you lodge those questions into your brain begins to come up with answers to those questions. And I guarantee you they're not empowering. They're going to make you feel miserable. I learned at a young age that high performers ask better questions. They take conscious charge of that process, and say things like, how can I grow from this? What are those things that I'm strong at? Who's out there who can help me? As soon as you ask those questions, you get better answers, and they're empowering answers. And so I'm a big believer that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of questions we consistently ask ourselves. And that's a habit I've tried to adopt since my younger years.
It's a great habit. It's a challenge because we want to. Sometimes we're in a little bit of a pity party with ourselves, and so we'll go through. Oh, this never works out. Why am I always fat? Not a good question.
No, because you'll get some answers.
Well, because you don't do shit. That's why. You eat chocolate cake. What is an unusual or absurd thing that you love? Somebody would look at it and go, "That's weird. He loves that." Is there anything that falls into that category that somebody would think that is weird?
Yeah, I would. My family teases me about this. For some reason, dentistry fascinates me.
There you go. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, I think I could have been a dentist. I don't know why. I just think it fascinates me. The whole dentistry. And I don't even like the idea of putting my hands in another person's mouth. I don't. But teeth. I don't know. It's just weird.
Isn't that funny? I have this weird fascination now with Hasidic Jews.
Ah.
I don't know why. I'm watching them on YouTube, and their culture is fascinating to me with the hats and the outfits and how they sleep in separate beds, and it's just, I don't know where these things come from, but I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
If you could spend 1 month anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
I'm going to go off-world. I'd love to spend a month in space. Yeah, and my boys, they are fascinated with space. They both want to go to space. I'm like, hey, if you go to space, I'm going with you. I would love to see the Earth from off the Earth. Yeah.
I've done 300 episodes asking that question. You are the first one that took me off the planet.
Nice.
Wow. That's fascinating. I think that there's a whole, we could hire a therapist to figure out why you came up with that. That was good. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay. So we'll do a quick speed round and then we'll wrap up. What would your friend say is one of your superpowers?
Articulating concepts in a simple way.
Do you collect anything or have you collected anything?
Yeah, when I was a kid, for some reason, where we went to school, there was a chestnut tree, and we all started collecting these chestnuts that were falling on the ground. And I ended up with a drawer of like 300 or 400 chestnuts in this drawer. And that was when I decided I didn't need to collect anything, because I was like, what the hell am I going to do with all these chestnuts? And so so I've never collected anything since.
You have another drawer with stamps. Yeah, I get it. What do people never ask you, but you wish they did? I wish they'd ask me this question. They never ask me this question. They asked me about Osama bin Laden. They asked me about jumping into the ocean, but they never asked me this question.
Probably, what are you grateful for? That's a great question to ask anybody. It's a great question to ask yourself, by the way. If you don't have a question, if you have a better question to ask anytime, by the way, use that one. What am I grateful for?
It's a great one. I do that one every morning. What book have you reread the most?
Yeah. All right. So I love the book Sapiens by Harari, but that's my adult book. Okay.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, there was a series of books called the Great Brain series. And I remember reading that when I was a kid, when I was probably in third grade. And there was like 6 or 7 books in the series. I must have read that whole series, a dozen or more times, every book like a dozen or more times, about a kid growing up in the late 1800s.
And it's called Great Brain, as in brain?
The Great Brain. His brother, this kid, the guy who writes about his brother, who was just really smart and used to generate ways to make money and swindle people. And I just loved it. So, yeah. That's
awesome. Okay, last question. We'll change it up a little bit. What one question would you like to ask me?
What inspires you?
What inspires me is people, particularly entrepreneurs, waking up to their life and that this is not a dress rehearsal. And the fact that they go all in on one area of their life is damaging to them. They are developed. It's kind of like the guy who goes to the gym and only does chest because he's good at it, or biceps, but he doesn't want to do his legs because it's hard for him. Mm-hmm. That's the way entrepreneurs are. They are good at making money. They're good at starting corporations. They're good at having employees, but their relationship is not great. Their body is not great. Their connection to the spiritual side is not great. And what inspires me is facilitating in any way that I could them having a different experience outside of business, which is all these pictures that you see behind me. I do events around the world where I take entrepreneurs and I do all kinds of stuff with them. We were, before the pandemic, we were truffle hunting with a dog in Tuscany. We before that, we were in the batting cages at Fenway Park hitting balls. Before that, we were doing a vintage car ride through the French Riviera. So next, God willing, in June, we're going to be going to Mykonos, Greece. Nice. So I literally force them out of their day-to-day to get them away from the thing that they're addicted to, and watching them unfold when they're sipping a glass of champagne, looking out at the French Riviera and connecting with other entrepreneurs, and they're talking about life and how great it is. That's what they're working for. But they just, they hit a goal, they want $1 million, and then it becomes 2 million and 3 million and 5 million, and the bar just keeps moving, and then they have a heart attack and they're dead. And I want them to experience and see their life. That's what this show is about, and that's what the events that I do about courses that I have, et cetera. So that's what lights me up.
Awesome. That's very inspiring.
Well, dude, this was amazing. I will link everything up in the show notes. Have everybody go out there and grab your book. Do you have any final words, suggestions, or an ask for the people that are listening?
I would just say, check out the book, check out the assessment tool at the website, theattributes.com, and figure out your own engine. I think you'll enjoy the process of lifting your own hood and figuring it out. So.
Oh my God, that's going to be the title of this show. Figure out your own engine. That was good. That was good. Rich, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. It was such a pleasure. So thanks for having me.